Hello, and thank you for joining me for the sixth of my ghost stories. You may have actually heard this one yesterday at the time of recording, because I was live streaming a series of ghost stories, including the new one, on my Twitch channel. It was the first airing, so it didn't go completely smoothly, but it went well, and I think it got a good reception. But I wanted to do a proper recording for this, as I've done with all the other stories. This is slightly different because I'm doing it using my new microphone and my new webcam, which is high definition. So although my camera's good, I find it a lot easier to work with these than to be constantly transferring between the memory card on my computer, on my camera, and then checking it on the computer. This is a lot easier for recording, and the microphone is good quality, so it should be less crackly a sound and clearer, hopefully. This story is called Six. It's set in the 1960s, so I hope you enjoy it. It's called Six not because it's the sixth story, but there is a reason behind it, which will make sense in due course. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you for your letter the other week. Our contact has passed me these accounts from the 6 passengers of the cable car you mentioned. I hope this clears the matter for you. Max. I'd hit rock bottom. Losing my job was losing my life in a way. I'd been a stockbroker for 15 years, since I left college. But it's cutthroat, and some say I dodged a bullet. It's been a bitter pill for me to swallow, though. That's why I got away, left it all behind. Oh yes, you were asking about the cable car. Like I say, I needed to get away, so I packed a bag and boarded the cable car. It crosses the ravine from one side of the county to the other. If you need a break or want to go somewhere nice, you take the car. It's pretty big inside and has multiple compartments. From the outside, it's like a big red pill, suspended from cables, travelling through the air. Sometimes I've seen it very busy, but when I went there were only 6 of us on board. Me, Max, then Jackie, a housewife, Arthur, a construction worker, young fella, Helen, worked in the bank, John, a realtor, a stubborn guy, and lastly, Marianne, super clever and forensically minded. We didn't speak to each other at first, just the occasional smile and nod, but it's easy to forget how long the cable car takes to cross the ravine. Helen spoke first, which makes sense now I know her job, as she's used to speaking with people. I don't remember what she said, but I reckon it was something about how long the car takes. Then Arthur went to get a coffee. One of the compartments is like a small diner. I wasn't really paying much attention at this point, to be honest. I've been a bit distant lately. My ex said I've lost the spark in my eyes. I don't know if that's because I lost my job, or the reason why I lost my job. You can't fire someone because they've got no spark, but you can if they make you no money. Sorry, the cable car. I think the journey took longer than we thought it would. In the end, I went and got myself a coffee and a pack of smokes and a donut. I think we all got something from the diner. A nice lad was working there, friendly and cheerful in the way that you might be to an old friend. When I got back to the car with the other passengers, John and Helen were having a conversation that made me uneasy. Jackie. I didn't get anything from the diner. I wouldn't dream of spoiling my appetite when I've got a big dinner tonight with all our new neighbours. I live just out the city in a new town, truly fit for the modern age. My husband got a promotion at the plant, so we bought a new house and a new oven. Sorry, you want to know about the cable car. Where was I? Oh yes, Helen and John were talking and clearly getting irritated at each other. I'm not really sure what about, but Helen seemed very anxious. She had that face you make when you've suddenly remembered something you needed to do. Or maybe when you've remembered something bad. I always thought bank tellers were calm and had good memories, but Helen definitely did not give that impression. I hadn't spoken to Marianne at this point, but all of them were behaving a bit like Helen, nervous and forgetful. Except John. He seemed sure of everything. I think a realtor has got to be confident. Any doubt, any trace, and you get put off the sale. Funny, his firm sold us our house. One thing I will say, the car took a very long time. We were crawling across that ravine for ages. But I don't mind. I prefer a slower pace to things myself. I will say as well, the company, Stones, who run the cable car, need to sort out their overheating problem. I was boiling the whole way. It was odd, but the diner compartment was a bit cooler. You'd think it'd be the hottest part. The nice young man at the counter asked if I was okay, which I thought was nice. He seemed familiar. I knew I didn't know him, but he smiled and spoke in the sort of way you might to someone you saw a fair few times, an acquaintance, if you will. I went into the diner, just as Max, gloomy man, was leaving for the passenger compartment again. I'd just come out there, for the heat, and also to avoid John and Helen's conversation. If you can call it a conversation. I remember now, Helen was saying something about barely being able to see out the window, and why the car was taking so long. John was being calm and rational, though maybe a bit patronising. He was the only one talking any sense. It's often foggy in the ravine, and the car has to go slowly, what with all the compartments. It's all normal to me. Arthur. I was bored of listening to John and Helen argue, so I went for a walk around the car, and Max tagged along. It's massive inside, meters and meters of iron and steel, creaking and groaning under its own weight. But still it stays in the air. Max doesn't talk much, but I didn't mind. Better than the arguing going on in the passenger compartment. But still, I was starting to think Helen was talking sense. Sure, she was being hysterical, but a lot of what she said added up. Truth is, Max and I never saw the entire car. Don't you think it's odd how big the vehicle is? And another thing I don't get, Max pointed this out, on the whole journey we saw one person other than us 6 passengers, the guy in the diner. He was nice enough, but perhaps too friendly for my liking. I said this early on as a sort of joking comment, but everyone else kind of brushed it off. He just talks like he knows you, not in that way they do to try and sell you stuff, but like he actually knows. Not sure I convinced Max on that. Anyway, we got bored of wandering, so we headed back to the compartment. Something else odd that I noticed, especially on the way back, was the metal, the walls, the floor, all of it. What I'm saying is, when you've worked in construction for a while, you know when something is new and when something needs fixing. When you arrive, it should need fixing or building, and when you leave, it should look new. That's common sense, really. So my question is, why is the paint not chipped? Why are there no scuff marks on the floor? It doesn't add up. I raised all this back in the compartment, and Max was definitely listening. I think Helen had already realised these things. Jackie seemed unsure. John still wouldn't accept any of it. And Marianne, well, she was dead quiet. She'd been consistently silent throughout. She didn't seem shy. It's just like she didn't want to speak. Some people have confident eyes. She has confident eyes. I got quite vocal and angry at John for not listening, and I'm sorry for that, but his attitude was frustrating me. When people put plain facts in front of somebody and they just look away, it makes me mad. Then, in the middle of a shouting match between me and John, with Helen joining me and Jackie trying to split us up, Max laughed. Max doesn't seem the laughing type. He looks like he's had a few rough years and may have a few more ahead of him. So if he laughs, something ain't right. We all kind of stopped shouting, and Jackie asked Max to explain himself. He simply said, "It's just us." Jackie asked him what he meant, but she didn't need to. He'd made himself very clear. We were making so much noise, but no one had come to see what was going on. Just as Max and I had discovered earlier, there was no one else in the car, apparently, except the guy in the diner, right next door. So why did he not come in? None of this makes sense. Helen. Once all of us, except John, were on the same page, in that we didn't know what was happening, but that we knew none of this made sense, other questions started springing up. No one could remember paying for their ticket, though Jackie was best at fabricating a story, and John was the best at deflecting. No one could explain why the same song had been playing on a loop in the diner. I must have been the only one who had noticed this. And no one could explain why none of us actually remember boarding the car. We've all got stories of what we were doing before this, but none of them tie up with arriving at the cable car. Max was just leaving a bar, apparently. Jackie was on her way home from the shops. Arthur had been working at a construction site. I was on my way home from the bank. John was heading out to meet some house buyers. And Marianne, she's an odd one, said very little, up to now, only asked vague questions. It's funny, it's like she knew the answers but wanted to see if we did. I can't put my finger on why, but she reminds me a bit of the guy in the diner. What is it about them? Familiarity, that's it. He looks at you, talks, in a way as if he knows you. Marianne does too, but not in the same way. The guy in the diner has warmth in his eyes and tone. Max used a word to describe Marianne. Forensic. She looks at us like she knows us, and while not unpleasant or unkind, there is a cold, forensic detachment about her. Some of the questions she asked, I can't remember exactly, but they seemed like they were trying to draw us towards a particular conclusion. I think John sensed this, and most of his anger by this point was directed at her. He seems very used to more submissive women, but Marianne wasn't giving anything away. She kept her cards close to her chest. Jackie was getting really frustrated with John by this point, having earlier agreed with him, so she changed the subject to the weather. I actually think this made things worse. Looking out the window, I think Jackie meant to remark how foggy it was. But fog is something. It's water vapour. You can usually see something. What we were looking at was nothing. No ravine, no fog, just nothing. There's one last thing I want to add. I reckon the impression you've got is that we all got more worried as the journey progressed. Truth is, I was worried from the start. Something about the vehicle, the metal, the sound, I didn't like it. John. If Helen hadn't started worrying and panicking, everyone else would have been fine. I read an article the other day on perception. Very interesting stuff, you know. The mind's eye, what your brain sees that wasn't really there. Helen was getting hysterical, and frankly Marianne didn't help. Don't get me wrong, I like it when other people don't say much. But what she did say really got under my skin. It was all these cryptic questions. A very knowing person. Arrogant, you might say. Arthur and Max didn't help one bit, just adding more questions. And Jackie, bless her, she didn't know what was going on. Of all the people to be stuck with, these five. I got a bit fed up after a while. Actually, a bit is an understatement. I went to the diner compartment. It was very bright in there. The guy was just clearing tables, but occasionally he looked at me and smiled. And once it seemed like he was going to say something, but stopped. I didn't get anything in the diner, just sat in silence and looked out the window and smoked. Out into the white, the fog, if that is what it was. I think the others had got to me. I was furious about that, to be honest. I got up and was going to storm back into the passenger compartment, but I never made it that far. I went out into the corridor, separating the diner from the compartments, and something caught my eye a way off. I ran down the corridor towards this flickering light, like a torch, but I had to slow down, as I was out of breath, and my chest felt tight. Guess the air is thinner this high up. Eventually, it was clear this wasn't a torch. The corridor appeared to fade in front of me, and the light filled the space. And then, well, I ended up here. How did I end up here? Marianne. Helen was the first to realise something had changed, and I think the other 5 all did eventually, but none of them have worked out what was going on. I'm glad they didn't. It's always unpleasant if passengers find out. In any case, here are their recorded causes of death. Max Wilson, 32, overdose at his apartment. Jackie Spitzer, 44, house fire, caused by an oven most likely. Arthur Walton, 26, workplace accident, construction site. Helen Parker, 28, car accident, collision on leaving work. John Mason, 47, cardiac arrest outside home. All of their accounts suggest they were partly aware of these. They make vague references from time to time. But some things remain unanswered. I hope these accounts are useful. Yours faithfully, Marianne.